Understanding criminal behavior is one thing. Applying that understanding is something entirely different. Throughout this course, we have built the foundations of profiling step by step. In the first lesson, we focused on decisions and the chain of behavior that shapes every crime. In the second lesson, we moved beneath visible action and examined the psychological mechanisms behind violence. In the third lesson, we introduced typologies as tools for comparison, not as rigid labels. In the fourth lesson, we explored how behavior unfolds before, during, and after the offense. Now, in this final lesson, we bring all of those layers together. Because profiling becomes truly useful only when theory is translated into disciplined, practical analysis. This lesson is not about a dramatic ending. It is about showing how behavioral analysis actually works. Profiling is not intuition. It is not mind reading. It is not storytelling. Profiling is a method. It begins with evidence, moves through behavior, and ends with cautious inference. A weak analysis begins with a story. A strong analysis begins with facts. A weak analysis says, this looks personal, emotional, or planned, before the evidence has been tested. A strong analysis asks a different question. What exactly supports this interpretation? To make this practical, let us work through a structured case example. Imagine investigators are dealing with a homicide near an abandoned service building in an isolated urban area. The victim was found in a location with reduced visibility from the street, but not completely hidden. There are signs that the victim was moved a short distance after the initial contact. The area offers a practical entry point, limited pedestrian traffic, and more than one possible exit route. Some elements suggest preparation. Other elements suggest pressure and a possible loss of control. At first glance, it may be tempting to label the offender immediately. Organized, disorganized, personal, opportunistic, emotionally driven, predatory. But this is exactly where disciplined analysis must slow down. The first task is not to label the offender. The first task is to separate what is known from what is assumed. What is known? The location offered some environmental advantage. The offender appears to have approached the victim and controlled the interaction, at least briefly. The victim was moved, but only a short distance. The body was not fully concealed after the event. Some evidence was left behind, rather than fully managed or removed. The behavior appears to become more chaotic once the victim begins resisting. Now consider what is not known. We do not know whether the offender personally knew the victim. We do not know whether the location was chosen in advance or recognized as useful in the moment. We do not know whether homicide was the original intention from the start. We do not know whether the visible disorder reflects panic, inexperience, time pressure, or emotional escalation. This distinction is essential because many analytical errors begin when assumptions are treated as facts. So we begin where profiling should always begin, with behavior. First, the pre-offense phase. Before the offense, the key question is how the offender entered the situation. Did the offender reduce uncertainty? Did the offender select a location with clear advantages? In this example, the location matters because it offered reduced visibility and lower risk. That does not automatically prove extensive planning, but it does suggest behavioral awareness. The offender may have been familiar with the area and recognized its practical value. Or the offender may have been opportunistic, but capable of quickly recognizing environmental advantage. The point is not to exaggerate the location. The point is to understand how the offender used it. A weak analysis would say the offender planned everything. A stronger analysis would say the offender appears to have used an environment that reduced visibility and increased control. That interpretation stays close to behavior. It does not claim more than the evidence supports. Now we move to the offense itself. During the event, the offender is forced to act under real conditions rather than private imagination. If fantasy was present, it now collides with unpredictability. If planning existed, it now faces pressure. If the offender needed control, that control now has to be maintained in a real interaction. In our example, the offender appears to control the victim initially. But once the victim resists, the behavioral sequence begins to change. Violence escalates. The interaction becomes less orderly. Behavior appears less stable. Some evidence is left behind, and the offender does not fully complete risk reduction behavior. That shift matters because it suggests that the offender's control may have been conditional rather than stable. The offender may have managed the situation while events followed an expected pattern, but destabilized once resistance increased. This is why the organized versus disorganized distinction must be used carefully. The better question is not, was this offender organized or disorganized? The better question is, which parts of the offense show structure and which parts show breakdown? The approach may show planning, location awareness, and reduced uncertainty. The middle of the event may show destabilization, emotional pressure, or reduced regulation. The aftermath may show haste and incomplete management rather than full control. Now we bring in the psychological mechanisms from earlier lessons. The rapid escalation after resistance could be consistent with emotional flooding or rising internal pressure. It could suggest that resistance was experienced as threat, humiliation, or loss of dominance. It could also suggest an internal script that depended on compliance and break down when reality changed. Or it may reflect practical panic where the offender feared detection and escalated to end the situation quickly. The key is not to choose one explanation too quickly. The key is to compare possibilities. Now we move to the post-offense phase. After the offense, the offender must manage consequences, and this phase is often highly revealing. The immediate goal has already been completed, interrupted, or abandoned. What happens next matters. In our example, the body is not fully concealed. Some evidence is also left behind, instead of being fully managed. That may suggest haste, but haste itself is not a final explanation. It may reflect panic. It may reflect interruption. It may reflect limited forensic awareness. It may also reflect emotional exhaustion after escalation, or a belief that the location was protective enough. One of the most powerful tools in behavioral analysis is comparing what the offender did with what the offender could have done. The victim was moved, but only a short distance. That may suggest a wish to reduce visibility under limited time. The offender chose a low visibility area, but not a fully hidden one. That suggests practical awareness, not necessarily deep planning. The offender controlled the beginning of the interaction, but not the later sequence. That suggests conditional confidence. Even after the destabilization, the offender still appears to have used a workable exit route. Now, a behavioral pattern begins to emerge, not as certainty, but as structured interpretation. Typologies can help at this point, but only if they are used properly. Used badly, they become labels. Used properly, they become questions. Which parts of the offense are organized? Which parts are reactive? Which parts suggest control? And which suggest instability? The same principle applies to motive. Motive should never be reduced to a single word too quickly. Anger, revenge, control, fear, financial gain. These words may be useful, but only when they explain actual behavior. The deeper question is this: what did the offense seem to do for the offender psychologically? Did it discharge tension, restore control, punish the victim, eliminate a threat, act out a fantasy? These are hypotheses, and hypotheses must always be tested. This is also where analytical errors become dangerous, especially confirmation bias. If an analyst decides too early that the crime was planned, emotional, or personal, every later detail may be forced to fit. Real profiling asks a different question. What else could this mean? What else could explain the location, escalation, movement, or incomplete concealment? A conclusion that survives alternatives is always stronger than one that was never tested. So, what does the method look like in practice? Start with facts. Separate fact from assumption. Reconstruct the sequence. Identify decisions. Compare what happened with what could have happened. Develop alternatives. Test them carefully. And only then, form a cautious behavioral interpretation. In this example, the offender may be someone who can recognize opportunity and use environmental advantage, but may not maintain full control once resistance increases. The offense may reflect a combination of situational planning and reactive escalation. Partial organization before the event, destabilization during it, and incomplete management afterward. And this is where the whole course comes together. Decisions, motivation, typologies, and the timeline of before, during, and after the offense. Profiling does not replace evidence. It helps organize evidence. It does not create certainty. It creates structure under uncertainty. Profiling is not about dramatic conclusions. It is about disciplined interpretation of behavior. Not guessing but reasoning. Not myth but method. And that is where serious analysis begins. If you have completed the course, you can access your certificate below.